I would not put any stock into what any Fed chairman says, because you always have to remember that these guys are there to tell a story, and they always want to put a positive spin on everything. And even if they're concerned about something, they'll never admit it. Like when Ben Bernanke was at the Fed telling everybody not to worry about the mortgage market, subprime was contained. He later admitted in an interview after he was no longer Fed chair that he didn't really believe that. He was just simply trying to advance the administration's view that everything was great. And so he couldn't really speak his mind. He kind of had to act as if he was part of the Bush administration, which I thought was a very telling admission that not many people picked up on. But I think Janet Yellen, or now Jerome Powell rather at Fed, Yellen's at Treasury, but I think Powell also fancies himself part of that Biden administration. And so he wants to say positive things. He can't say, I think we're going to have really high inflation. Because then, what is the Fed going to do about it? Well, you better raise interest rates. You better shrink your money supply. You better stop financing all these stimulus bills. So in order to validate their easy money policy, Powell basically has to say that any increases that we experience in consumer prices are just a temporary aberration. It's transitory, and don't worry about it. But I don't think that's the case at all. I think that what we're seeing now is the beginning of a very, very big acceleration in U.S. Consumer prices. Powell may think it's contained to a transitory event, but it's not. It's as much contained as the subprime crisis was contained. And I think the low inflation that we've enjoyed over the last 20, 25 years, I think a lot of that is through sleight of hand. But I think a lot of the temporary factors that were kind of mitigating the increases, because America was able to run these huge trade deficits. We were able to export our dollars to countries like China, and China would warehouse the dollars, recycle them into U.S. treasuries, and then replace them with consumer goods. The Chinese were producing all these low-cost consumer goods for Americans to buy, and the rest of the world was helping out. And so these factors were mitigating consumer prices, plus a lot of the liquidity, the inflation that the Fed was creating. It went into the stock market. It went into the real estate market, into the cryptocurrency market, into the bond market. So I think a lot of these bubbles, as they deflate, the money is ultimately going to go into consumer prices, commodities, and things like that. And so we're about to see a tsunami of inflation. And whether the Fed is oblivious to it or just lying about it, there's no way to know. Yeah, well, in my mind, I think it's already started. You could look at some of these price increases, and they're very spectacular. And, they're just starting to work their way through the system. And again, I don't think we're transitioning, or it's transitory, unless you're saying we're transitioning from low inflation to high inflation, which is really what's happening. But what you want to look at to understand inflation is you look at the money supply. Because it's the money supply that was being inflated. Literally, that's where the word comes from. Inflation is to expand. You inflate, right? When something is inflated, it expands. Prices don't expand. They go up, they go down, but they don't expand. It's money supply that expands. And we have the most expansionary monetary policy in U.S. history. And no other era is even close to what we're doing right now. So this is massive inflation, because as the Federal Reserve is dumping all this newly printed money onto the economy, there's actually less stuff for people to buy, because more and more people who used to be engaged in productive activities, whether they were producing goods or providing services, a lot of these people are now sitting at home collecting these government checks. So we're creating more money to buy goods, but we're producing fewer goods to buy.
Before we continue, help us by smashing that YouTube like button and subscribe now to this channel. This shows the algorithm that you value the information, and it helps us spread this message. Sharing is caring. Please like and subscribe now. Thank you. And now let's continue.
And so how can prices not go way up? Anybody who doesn't think that prices are going to go way up, just not only don't they understand basic economics, they just don't even have any common sense. Yeah, you remember, a lot of this money that people have saved was sent to them by the government. It's not like they earned more money and just didn't spend some of their increased earnings. the government just handed out this money. And yes, a lot of people haven't been able to spend it yet because they haven't got out of the house. And so they have bought a lot of goods. That's why our trade deficits in merchandise are at all-time record highs. So unemployed Americans have been able to shop on Amazon and buy, products made in China, but there's still a lot of other money that they haven't spent yet that was provided to them by the government. And also, we don't know to what extent are Americans not paying their rent, not paying their mortgages because of these moratoriums, and instead they're just holding on to the cash. So who knows, right? Because if you're told by your landlord, we can't evict you if you don't pay your rent, well, why pay it? I mean, I can live here for free. And so people could be accumulating this cash because they're not paying some of their bills. But yes, eventually, all of this hoarded cash is going to be spent. And if we're not producing more goods and services for the money to be spent on, then all it could do is bid up the prices on the goods and services that already exist. I don't know if I could describe it if it hasn't happened yet. I mean, we can look at other countries and how, they've dealt with these problems. But we're in a situation where we have so much debt. And in fact, Janet Yellen was asked a question, was watching her in a Q&A. Right. The person questioning her said, hey, when you were Fed chair, you did warn that we had too much debt. And here you are now as Secretary of the Treasury, we have a lot more debt. I think it was 70% of GDP when she said it was a problem, and now it's over 100%. And that's just debt held by the public, not total debt. Right. The question was, why aren't you worried anymore about the debt? Her answer to that question was that, well, interest rates are really low. And the reason it's not a problem is because the rates are so low. And so servicing the debt is not that big a burden given how low rates are. But it's unfortunate that the senator who asked her that question didn't follow up with a better question. What happens when interest rates go up? I mean, isn't it reckless and irresponsible to say we can afford all this debt because temporarily we have these low rates of interest, knowing that the national debt is financed mostly with short-term paper and the government has to constantly roll over these T-bills and, they're going to get the prevailing rate. Well, if you have this huge amount of debt and the only reason there's not a crisis is because interest rates are low, what happens if they're not low? What happens if interest rates are high? My thinking is if it can't fight inflation without bankrupting the U.S. government, it won't fight the inflation, which means it bankrupts the U.S. public because it destroys the value of the dollar. And as the dollar collapses, so too will the American standard of living, because Americans have been living for generations now off of the exorbitant privilege of the U.S. dollar being that world's reserve currency.
What to do in such a situation? Inform yourself and keep your financial education strong. We from the Compact Group offer our loyal subscribers a free educational portal with first-hand monetary, financial, and economic knowledge. Enter our invite-only Insider Club by clicking the link below. You will get access to first-class information far earlier than the rest. We have prepared a special deal for all our members where you can access a giant pool of Robert Kiyosaki's financial wisdom for just $1. To find out more, simply click the link below and join our Insider Club absolutely free. But there is more you can and should do. Build up several streams of income. More and more people realize that they have to take their future in their own hands, but they don't know how and where to start. We from Compact offer our Insider Club members unique opportunities. Strengthen your financial muscle and get the edge. Click the link below. Become part of our free Insider Club. No financial obligations. But there's one important thing you have to know. You have to become active. So do it now. Become active and see you on the other side.